Good day and welcome to Living Well with Adena. My name is Dr. Good day. My name is Dr. Kataka, and welcome to another episode of Living Well with Adena. Thank you for joining us today. You know, it's the middle of July. It's been a hot one here in Southern Ohio, and well, it's almost August. And with the coming on of August, our attentions are turned to school starting. I don't have to tell you, this is a different year, and local authorities as well as state authorities and local school boards are determining best on how to start the school year. For some of your students out there, you'll have a full 5-day in-person classroom. Some of you will have it blended, and some of you will be even virtual. But regardless, today we're joined by guests who will help us to understand how to get your student and your student athletes ready for the school year, and what are important topics for you to think through, particularly as we enter sports season and return of school. So I'm pleased to introduce to you today two guests. First with us is Carrie Johnson. Carrie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, Carrie is a nurse practitioner at the Adena Family Medicine Waverly, and she'll be talking to us today about the health of students. She's also joined with us with Shane Wells. Shane's an athletic trainer with the sports medicine program here at Adena. Welcome, Shane.
Thank you.
And we look forward to hearing more about what an athletic trainer is, what do you do, and in particular, giving some advice for our student athletes.
Great.
Carrie, let's turn our attention to you first and start off. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
So I have been with Adena since February of 17, so a little over 3 years. I work at the Waverly office. I grew up in Canal, Winchester, but my family's from Rio. I played softball. Since we're talking about athletics today, I played up until college. I was a center fielder until I got hurt, so even more important to have the athletic trainer today. So I'm married and I have a 2-year-old. Well, she'll be 2 on Sunday. So
congratulations. Happy birthday to your little one.
I know.
So you've played sports as well, but so when you went to school, did you go to school to be a nurse practitioner, or did you start to be a nurse first? Tell us a little bit about that background.
So I went to be a nurse practitioner in a roundabout way. So I originally went to school to be a teacher and then a chemist. So I have my original degree. I went to Ohio Dominican where I played softball, and I got a bachelor's in chemistry. And then I decided to be a nurse later. So I went to Rio. I got my associates in nursing, and I worked at Adena for a year. Then I went to Riverside, and because I already had a bachelor's, I was able to get my master's without getting a bachelor's in nursing.
And as a nurse practitioner, you see patients now. Tell us a little bit about your scope of practice.
I work on a team with Dr. Smith and Melissa Flores, who's another nurse practitioner. We share a patient panel. We try to save the most complicated patients for Dr. Smith since he works in internal medicine. Melissa and I see a group of patients. We see teenagers. We see people for depression, anxiety, diabetics, people with COPD, people with heart disease. We're able to write prescriptions, manage their health. We make referrals.
And are you busy this time of year with child checks and sports physicals as well?
Yes, and I actually have a sports physical later this afternoon.
All right, so we'll talk more about that so we can provide the audience a little bit more background about what to expect when the student comes in to see a sports physical. And Shane, you're an athletic trainer. Tell us a little bit more about what that means, where you're at, and what you do.
Well, I've been with Dina. I'm going into my 19th season as an athletic trainer with Dina.
Awesome.
I provide care to Oak Hill High School, which I'm there full time, take care of all the athletes. We're providing care and covering games for all sports. We take care of everybody for practices, traveling with the football team, taking care of things, handling all their healthcare needs as far as sports medicine wise. Somebody's injured, we're helping to get them into the physicians or the nurse practitioners so that we can get them to the next level, making sure they can get their x-rays, MRIs, whatever we need at that point. We work with managing the concussion program that we have here at Adena to making sure that the kids are the safest they can be when they're playing. We want them to enjoy the game and enjoy the rest of their life, so we want them to be as safe as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. You know, the Ohio High School Athletic Association is really one of the governing boards that helps determine how high school athletics are run in Ohio. I'm sure this year is going to be a little different. We did some research. They did put out a return to play guideline for a variety of sports. Just in brief summary, some of the highlights that we have here is maintaining physical distancing while not on field or court of play, requiring face coverings while not on the field, reducing or eliminating unnecessary travel. So we'll be talking to you a little bit about that here in just a couple minutes, and trying to eliminate the sharing of common equipment as well. So lots to talk about here to help parents navigate that. So Carrie, let's turn our attention back to you. You mentioned you have a sports physical this afternoon. Can you talk with our audience a little bit about what would a student athlete expect when they're coming in for a sports physical or a well exam that's emphasizing some sports?
What we request first is that all the paperwork be filled out before they come to the office. It's probably one of the most important things, mainly because it makes the visit more fluid. Because I like to look at the paperwork, go over it with the parent and the student before I do the physical exam, because if there's anything abnormal on the paperwork, I can focus my exam a little bit more further on those abnormalities, or adjust the physical joint exam if they've had a previous injury. So maybe they can't do certain joint mobility tests because they've had an injury in the past.
So Carrie or Shane, where would a parent or student athlete get these forms or this paperwork?
The paperwork, I think, is available on the Ohio High School Athletic Association website, and they can either fill it out online and print it from there, or they can print it and then fill it out by hand.
Now, is it true too, Shane, that if once they go online and fill it out, that all they have to do next year is just log back in and update a few things?
There are certain programs that we use at some of our schools that are that way. This year's been a little bit fuzzy just because when we was prepping for all this with the physicals, school got shut down in the spring. So everybody's kind of just flying right now to hoping to get the paperwork in. But we use a lot of our schools, we use the programs that once they put it in, it's there next year. Makes life easier on the parents.
That really is nice. So I don't know if you're like me, having to fill out a form more than once can be a little, I don't know if irritating is the right word, but certainly it's nice to be able to just do that form once and update that.
And it is daunting.
Yeah. So Carrie, continue on. So the form is really important. It helps guide you to the exam. What else could the parent or student expect?
So once we go over the questionnaire, which includes things like a family history of asthma, the patient's history of asthma, heart disease in the family, the patient's history of heart disease, injuries that they've had in the past, then we do a full physical. So head to toe, we go over, we look at their spine, we look at their joints, we listen to their heart, make sure they don't have a murmur. Listen to their lungs, and then we talk about different things when they're exercising. Do they have a cough when they exercise? Do they develop a cough later? Are they getting more tired than their friends when they're running? Do they notice if they are behind their friends? Do they notice if they're coughing more than their friends? Do they have a certain joint that they have more trouble with? Are there certain exercises they can't do? At the end, the Athletic Association requires that they do a duck walk. So they have to
walk. Yeah, tell us more about what a duck walk is.
So they have to squat down like a catcher and then take a couple steps, forward. So that just tests flexibility, joint mobility. So like I said, if they've had like a hip injury, sometimes I don't make them do that complete. We modify it a little bit. And then they have to hop for balance, hop on one foot, hop on the other foot. Those are just a couple of the other physical tests that we have them do.
Carrie, do you also have the opportunity with some of your student athletes to talk about vaping, tobacco use, alcohol, those types of topics that affect teenagers nowadays?
We do ask the regular wellness questions such as, how's your diet? How much time are you spending on your iPhone, your iPad, YouTube? Are you on your computer a lot? Do you play video games? How much activity are you getting outside of athletics? We talk about vaping and how it isn't better than smoking cigarettes. We talk about marijuana use. We talk about drug use. We talk about drinking with their friends and what's considered, it's never normal for a teenager, but what would be considered abnormal beyond the regular abnormal.
Understood, Carrie. So when you're talking about some of those sensitive subjects, do you find that you really have some good dialogue with parents and the patient?
I find nowadays that kids tend to be more open with their parents than what maybe we were when we were younger, and surprisingly so, to the degree that they're open with their parents, which is nice. And kids, I find, are on their iPads and tablets and computers a lot more as well. And as we talk about physical distancing, which we use that term at Adena, I feel like more than anywhere else, I think we've kind of coined that term instead of social distancing. We've seen a lot of anxiety and depression in teenagers a lot more this year too, and even adults, because they're not able to get out and do the things that they used to do. So we've had to focus a lot on that lately as well. So teaching kids that, there is Zoom, and there are other programs where they can get together with their friends. So just because you can't go and do things as a group and you have to be physically distant doesn't mean that you can't socially interact with your friends. And it's important to visually interact with your friends and not just, type something to your friends in order to reduce that anxiety and that depression, because kids are having a really hard time right now.
Indeed. You're hearing currently from Carrie Johnson, who's nurse practitioner at Adena Family Medicine in Waverly, and Shane Wells, who's joining us as that athletic trainer from Adena Sports Medicine. If any of you have questions or comments, don't forget that you can apply those right there at the bottom. We do have staff that's on standby that will field those questions and get that to these two guests here today. So Shane, before we leave the topic of sports physicals, who's required to get one?
All student athletes in grades 7 through 12. The majority of schools require their band members as well, because they're out marching in the heat and they're physically active. So pretty much any student that's physically active is required to get their annual physical.
So Shane, you work closely with the school, particularly with you at Oak Hill. So for those who might be concerned about what type of data is shared, can you give them an idea of why that information is given to the school, and then what do the school or the athletic trainers do with it in turn?
The school's getting the information that is going to determine their eligibility to play, determine if it's safe enough for them to participate in that sport. We've also got some code of conducts that is signed that kind of holds the athletes and the parents to a standard of what we respect for sportsmanship and dedication, things like that. There is also some HIPAA releases that allow the athletic trainer to talk to the coaches, to talk to the physicians, to talk to the school nurse, the physical education teacher, because if we've got an athlete that suffers a concussion, well, I don't want them participating in gym class. So I've got to be able to communicate with everybody. So we get those releases. Concussions, which is a hot topic, has some paperwork that the family signed that gives them the symptoms, what to look for, what to report, what our return to play guidelines are. We also have some of that with sudden cardiac arrest. And also there's a new form revolving around COVID this year that they're going to sign that gives them the symptoms, what we're doing, how we're going to handle things, which is still a little up in the air, but OHSAA is coming up with some good guidelines to try to make this sports happen.
That's the one we talk about that next, right? Because it is a different world, as I mentioned before, with COVID not coming on, but continuing, and we're still making decisions about sports. So we understand, of course, that the Ohio High School Athletic Association will make some further guidelines and determinations. But outside of that, can you give us kind of an idea? I know that I think the athletic trainers throughout the region have met, and give the audience some ideas about how you're going to attempt to make the area even safer for your student athletes.
What we're doing, our team of athletic trainers at Adena, which we're covering 11 schools with a full-time athletic trainer, and then we have a graduate assistant at one other school. So we've got 12 schools that we're involved in a 5-county area. We are working right now to develop our cleaning processes for our athletic training rooms. We're working on that physical distancing to make sure, as you've been in the athletic training room many times, it's a room that will hold 5 people and we got 30 in there. Just because that's the nature of athletics. We just pile in one spot and go. That's one thing we're really going to have to focus on and that's going to be hard for some of us because we've been in the business a long time, but we're going to be social distancing on that part. We're going to make sure that we're masking when we've got to be. We're going to be screening the athletes. We're working on plans for how do we handle if an athlete comes in with a fever, with symptoms, what's the best route of care to get them in. We know these athletes need to play sports. They need to be involved. They need to back to dealing with their friends. but we've also got to safely do it. So we're putting all this in place. We're working with our coaches, who we hold the highest regards to our coaches, that they've got to be stewards for what we're doing. They've got to be responsible to show the kids that I'm willing to take these steps. You need to take them too. And it's a new experience for all of us. The issue we're running into is traveling amongst other schools. Right now, everybody's in their pod, in their school, is doing fine. But when we start going outside into other counties, that's where we're running into some issues.
So will the athletes do even simple things like hand washing?
They will hand wash. They're got to bring their own water bottles.
Okay.
The days of somebody having a towel over their shoulder and everybody wiping their face off and going, we're single use in our towels, which I'm not sure how I'm going to accomplish that, but it's in the processes. They're going to do some hand washing before, after. They're going to do some sanitizing during practices and games before they're over getting the drink out of their water bottle. We're working on hands-free options to refill their water bottles, because hydration is important. We're in the heat of the summer. We've got to keep these kids hydrated. We're going to limit the contact of how long they are doing things at practice, to try to limit that exposure. And between each athlete, that we're going to sanitize some equipment that's normally it's clean, but it's cleaned at a weekly basis or a daily basis. Now it's going to be cleaned multi-times during practice. So we're putting a lot of standards into place to do our best to make this happen for these athletes.
Some of that may be good to do regardless of whether we're in COVID or not.
Yes.
As far as the cleanliness. So you mentioned heat, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because it is going to be August in Southern Ohio. It's easy to be above 90 degrees, and this year, of course, we're setting some records on the number of 90 degree. We add that to the humidity. A lot of places now have artificial turf. It tends to be a radiator of heat. So walk us through, what would be some concerning signs that parents would want to look for in their student athletes as far as their athlete having trouble with the heat?
You want to look for some extreme fatigue. If they're participating and not sweating, that's a major concern. The keys that we need to look for.
Let me pause there. So sweating is good then?
Sweating is good. That's going to help keep them cool.
But if you're hot and not sweating?
That's when we're into the danger zone.
I see.
And that's where we got to be really concerned, and we've got to get these athletes off the field, get them cooled down, and get them taken care of. As a parent, the best thing we can do is try to prevent some of this by really pushing hydration, making sure the kids are getting plenty of fluids, the right fluids, not soda pop and energy drinks and things like that. We're looking at water, sports drinks, being prepared, making sure that they're coming with plenty of fluids at this point. They are having the proper attire on. We don't want to send somebody out with their sweatshirt and sweatpants on to these turf fields, which are 10 degrees hotter than what your car thermometer says. So when the temperature on outside is 90 degrees, we're looking at 100 to 105 on that field.
So Carrie, can you give us an idea, a rule of thumb perhaps, of how much hydration would be appropriate during a sport, particularly that's outdoor and in the heat?
So what I usually tell my athletes is you want to make sure you're hydrated before you go.
Before.
So,
Okay.
And you don't want to just chug it 10 minutes before practice, because then you're usually going to get sick. So a couple hours before, you want to make sure you drink at least 1 bottle of water, because asking them to do more is not reasonable.
So a reasonable goal is
At least a bottle of water
before
or
practice.
Maybe a bottle of Gatorade, not the 32-ouncer,
Okay.
just the regular 16-ouncer of Gatorade a couple hours before, even an hour before. But if you do it too soon, you're going to make yourself sick. If you do it too late, then you're going to be dehydrated too soon, because then you haven't absorbed that hydration. And I don't know if that's the same thing that you tell them.
That's exactly the same thing we tell them. You want to be hydrated prior to. We're really hydrating for what's happening tomorrow versus what's happened today. So if they're hydrating and staying ahead of the game, then we're not playing catch up all the time. So that having something right prior to, you want a little bit prior to, but that hour is very important right there before we start.
So I might be telling my age a little bit, but back when I was in high school sports in the 80s, I think the overarching description was no water during practices at all, right? Drinking water was actually a sign of weakness. Does that still hold true for today's sports? And
No, today's sports, we're giving them water every 10 to 15 minutes during practices. If it's hotter, we're giving them more. Most athletes are going to have just open access to water. When they come out from a play or a break, they can get their drink at any time. So that, yeah, the old days of water's a weakness is gone. So we want them to really push what they're doing.
so staying maximally hydrated, would you say optimizes performance of the student athlete?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So you heard it there, right? Stay well hydrated, drink lots of fluids before, during, and after practice. Carrie, can you tell us a little bit too, when a student athlete goes to the restroom later that evening, how could they tell they're hydrated there?
The smell and the color of their urine. A lot of people do not look at their urine, especially when we ask them at their visits. They look at me like I'm asking them a very disgusting question and like I'm crazy. But that is the best and easiest way to tell if you're hydrated. If your urine is very dark and is very stinky or malodorous, then you're usually dehydrated.
That's when you know you should drink more, right?
Yes.
But if it's a light or clear, then you're in good shape.
Exactly.
Is that a good summary?
We use a rule of thumb with the athletes is you want to look like lemonade and not apple juice.
There you go. That's a
Put it
great way
into
to
some
put
great
that.
terms.
Awesome. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit too about what should a student athlete do if they're not feeling well, right? There's a lot of pressure to want to attend practice or a game. So, Carrie, would you give some advice to, if a student athlete's not well this time of year, what should they do?
They shouldn't go, or they should sit on the bench during the practice. Being a former athlete, I am guilty of this. I've even had friends that just wrapped their ankle in duct tape and played with a broken ankle the entire season because they didn't want to tell anyone, and they didn't want to get it fixed because then they'd have to sit out. I played with my shoulder injured half of my freshman year in college because you don't want to have to sit out. And it's probably the worst thing that you can do. So if you're not feeling well, you're not going to perform well, and you're going to pay for it later. So the best thing to do is to not play. Tell your coach, tell the athletic trainer. The sooner you get treated, the better you'll perform later.
Isn't it also true, Shane, now that we're living in this COVID-19 world, there is a potential that the student athlete could have COVID, transmit it to others, and then what would that do potentially to the entire program or school if there were one or two or more students starting to test positive for that virus?
Right now, from what I've been in contact with, what we've gotten from the Ohio High School Athletic Association, some of we're in contact with our health departments. If we have an athlete that tests positive, we're more than likely going to quarantine the entire team for 14 days. So
even more reason to be cautious then,
Yes.
right, about if you're not feeling well.
if you're not feeling well, don't bring it to the team.
At least reach out to their coach, they should reach out to their coaches, et cetera, and have that open and honest conversation, right? We do have a question coming in relating to heat illness. So we talked a little bit about what the student can do, but Shane, can you elaborate a little bit more on what are preventative measures that you're taking from a school level, athletic training level, to try to decrease the risk of heat illness?
The number one thing we're doing is we're monitoring the temperature and humidity. So we're checking that. We have charts that we go by as to what we're allowed to do at practice. If it's in a certain range, we might let them go out to practice for an hour with just football's our main focus. So football's going out with just helmets on instead of full pads. There may be days that we don't let any of our sports outside if the heat's up. So that's the number one thing that we're doing is we're monitoring the weather conditions. And with heat and humidity, and also you're talking about your turf, is giving that radiant temperature. So we've all got devices that monitor that, and we're taking those.
So you actually have things that you're looking at,
We've
actual numbers.
got things, that are sitting out on the field and are going nonstop during practices. So we're checking them not just one time before we start. Then we're mandating how much water we're giving them, how much break time. Do we condition that day? If a certain temperature, we just don't condition that day. We may practice, but we're going to condition and shorten practice down. So there's a lot of things that we do for that. And then you throw in the hydration, which is number for preventing this heat illness. We've got to do some acclimation time out in the sun mowing their grass. So we're bringing them out right now into the heat of practices, and we've got to keep an eye on that. And some kids are more prone to heat illnesses than others. It just depends on where they're coming from. And we really monitor every student to see. We do a lot during preseason of the kids are weighing in before practice, they're weighing out after practice, so we're monitoring how much weight they're losing during practice, which is normal. You're going to sweat some out. We're more concerned about, do they put that weight back on? And certain guidelines, the kids will not practice the next day if they haven't replenished their fluids.
So you're really optimizing their health and being careful. Probably even more important, right? Because students have been out for a much longer term. They've been out probably for most cases since March instead of late May or June. So even more reason to acclimate. Carrie, here's a question for you. What are some good dietary tips for student athletes?
The biggest thing for kids is to avoid the sugar and the snacking. It's so easy for kids to just go to the gas station and grab some snacks before practice because they don't have time to eat, or they don't want to take time to eat something like that has a balanced meal, proteins, vegetables, and complex carbs. The students that we worry the most about are probably the wrestlers, because there's so much pressure on them to lose weight. So they get really creative with their diet. So I spend a lot of time talking to them about what they're eating, how they're eating, and making sure they're keeping their food in them and making sure they're not getting too creative. But the biggest thing is they want to make sure they're getting enough protein for their muscles so that they're not depleting their muscle mass, and making sure they're getting complex carbohydrates and not just sugars and those snacks such as potato chips, quick things before practice, because they're going to burn those off so fast that they're not going to have enough energy to sustain themselves through the game or through practice.
So Carrie, I think I understand. A simple sugar, or it would be a Snickers candy bar. Is that a good? Correct. Can you give our viewers though an example of what a complex carbohydrate would be, in case they're not sure of that wording?
So.
Does that mean like more like a healthy
potato?
So more perhaps of a vegetable or something that you have to cook?
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So Shane, another question's coming in about concussion, right? And with contact sports in particular, of course, it could happen at any time. In any sport, it really can happen. So I think that's a little a fallacy. I think that we think it only happens in football, right? Or that it only happens in boys in football, right? So, but can you give us an idea what do we need to look for? One, what I say, my nephew or son or daughter, whomever, they might have a concussion.
You want to look for the symptoms. The common symptoms are going to be a headache, dizziness, blurred vision. They may have some nausea. You also want to know, you're going to know your nephew. You're going to know that just something's not right with them. They may be more emotional than they are normal. They may be sleeping more. They may just go the opposite, and they may be a quiet kid that just talks now. So you want to know that, and that's what helps us as athletic trainers, being around the athletes every day, as we get to know that kid and know something's just not right with them. But if they're headache, if they're really tired and want to sleep a lot, that's one thing a parent would really notice. But a headache and dizziness is kind of our number 1 and 2 symptoms that we look at.
Mm-hmm. Now, Shane, so let's take my nephew as an example. Let's say he was a little goofy to begin with, right?
You got to know your kids.
Right. So how are you going to know that was just his baseline, and that he was just kind of a cut up and a jokester, and maybe to really having a concussion? Do you do things before the season starts and then to compare?
We do some baseline testing to kind of find that guideline, that standard of what they are now. Because there's some athletes that we check their balance and they can't stand on one foot even when they're healthy. So when you put them on one foot when they're injured, it could look really bad. But that's what they look like when they started. Then it's not a change. But we're going to just being around them and getting to know them makes a big difference. But establishing that baseline So we're going to ask them questions. We're going to give them some memory things that they've got to remember and they've got to repeat for us. One of the big things is knowing the months. They got to say the months backwards. We have many kids that really can't say the months forwards, so you got to work around that. But just kind of finding that baseline before you get, because that goofy kid that talks all the time, when he's sitting over in the corner and doesn't say anything, that becomes a concern. Whereas the one you got to tell him, all right, sit down and be quiet again, that's his normal day. But if he's sitting over there and you haven't heard anything from him in the last hour, that's something to check on and see. The
Changes then.
Changes in their emotional status, how they're carrying themselves, their interest. If they're normally wanting to do things all the time and they're like, no, I just want to sit back and relax, that could be a concern. Kids are getting more educated on concussions. They know more about it than we did back in the day when we was in school.
Okay.
So they are very good about, I don't want to say ratting out's the right term, but kids care about other kids. And I have many seniors that will bring in a freshman and say, he's not right, you need to check him out. So the kids care about each other in those natures, and they know the risk and the effects. So it's good that they're more educated about it as well.
So Carrie, I think most parents understand the risk and those effects of concussions, but you mentioned earlier that there was a lot of pressure to perform in sports. So can you kind of walk through what would be some of the risks if a parent or student athlete ignored the concussion and continued to go back in and play?
There's a very high chance of re-injury and more chance of permanent injury to the student. And the more that you are stressing your brain, the longer it's going to take to heal. And the more risk you have of continuing to have that abnormality. And you may always have that abnormality because you never allowed your brain to heal. So a lot of times I will send them to the concussion clinic to deal with the physical aspect of things, but we really stress no phone, no TV.
Oh, so it's
no
not
reading.
just a physical rest.
No,
it's actually
brain rest is what we call it. And then we send a note to the teachers. Their tests need to be shorter. Maybe you need to read them their test. Maybe they can't. Maybe their concussion is severe enough that even reading the test sets them back and gives them their symptoms back. So somebody needs to read them their test and they need to do a verbal test until their score improves. So there's a lot of aspects with the concussion that people don't realize. So we have to be very careful with the kids. And kids don't always know how to tell you what's wrong. They don't know how to verbalize those things because they don't understand that they may just assume that that's normal. They're just having a bad day.
So you're stressing the importance then of care. So, you know, we've talked about several different topics, both from a primary care perspective and from an athletic perspective. We talked about what are you doing to take care of the student athletes and preventing heat and heat illness and heat stroke. We've talked about concussions. So you're doing a lot of things. And I think that has led to an award that I'd like to, Shane, for you to kind of talk about. But several schools in our region have been awarded what's called the National Athletic Trainers Association Safe Sport School Award. Did I get that right, Shane?
You got that right.
All right, great. So I'll say it one more time. It's the National Athletic Trainers Association Safe Sport School Award. Shane, tell us more about what went into that award and why that's an important designation for the schools in our area.
The schools that we cover, our 11 athletic trainers had set this goal forth of it provides the safest environment we can provide for these student athletes, and that's our goal. It was a series of recommendations and guidelines that needed to be put into place to make sure that the coaches are doing the right things, the school's doing the right things, we as athletic trainers are doing the right things. We've built healthcare teams not only within sports medicine, but also within the schools. So we have the school nurses, we have the principals involved. It has put emergency actions in place. That way we know if something happens, we know exactly where the AEDs are located. We know where any emergency is located, any equipment's needed. We know where the squad needs to be told as to what gate they need to come in, what door they need to use. We review these with the coaches every season. We review them with the emergency squads every season. Before a football game, we get together with the visiting team. We go over things. We get together with the administration, with the referees. So everybody knows that if there's an emergency situation, here's the steps to follow. And we're trying to streamline it so that if something happens, we're right there. We've got education in place for the heat illnesses, for the diet, for hydration. So we put those to the athletes. There is just so many factors that went into this. It took us about 3 years to complete this process to be able to get this award. And all of our schools are very proud to have it.
Congratulations to both the athletic trainers and the schools. The schools actually played a participatory part in that award, is that correct?
Yeah, they had to agree to all this that we're putting in place, and some of them step up and had to purchase the defibrillators. They had to purchase some equipment that we needed, and that the heat illness factor goes into it, so they had to put a lot of things into it as well.
Yeah, I think that goes to show you what a tremendous set of school districts and schools that we have in our region, and that really truly care about the student athletes. I think that's fantastic. Again, congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Carrie, this happens every year, right? I'm sure as we speak, there is some child out there who says, Mom, I want to play soccer. And soccer starts on Monday, and it's a Thursday. So Carrie, can they still get student athletes in for sports physicals? And if so, where could one go? How do they figure out in the few days they have left to get that physical done?
We offer same-day appointments at our office. I believe the Bone and Joint office has even appointments on Saturdays where they do it as well.
And I think there's a 779 fine
as
well. Could they go to an urgent care as well to get that?
I believe so, yeah.
But ideally, you'd want to attend.
You would want to see your primary care, and they can usually get you in pretty quickly. And if not, another person on their staff can usually get you in.
You can also go to adena.org and look at all the various primary care locations throughout our region, and they can that will guide you as well to areas that you can have your student come in for that as well. What could, not every, this is a question coming in, not every student is in a school district, right? Some students are being homeschooled. And so what do you think would be some tips, both from a primary care perspective, and as we're finishing up, Shane, here in the few minutes we have left from an athletic trainings perspective, what could parents do to have encourage activity in a child's day when they're homeschooled?
The high school that I went to actually had a program for homeschool children, and I'm not sure if we do in this area. Shane, you may be able to answer this. They were able to join athletics at the local schools. There's also many online programs where homeschool children, they can join athletics together. They have school sports for the homeschool children. They have different programs where they can get into programs together. But a lot of the schools that I participated with had programs like that. I don't know if that's available here.
The Ohio High School Athletic Association allows the homeschooled students to participate in the sports of their school district.
Oh, okay.
So even if they're homeschooled, if I have an Oak Hill student that's homeschooled, they can still participate in that school district on the sports teams.
And would you encourage that?
Yeah, I've had several in the past that have done it.
All right. Perfect. Speaking of athletes at the school, Shane, I'm going to make an announcement here as we're finishing up about Adena's 2020 Athlete of the Year. Can you tell us a little bit about that Athlete of the Year scholarship program?
That's a scholarship program that we've had in place for probably about 10 years now. We're looking for those, they're good athletes, but we're looking for those good kids too, that are doing more in their community, that are involved. We nominate each month. The schools in our whole service area can nominate. Then it kind of goes to a Facebook vote as to they pick the male and the female of each winner each month. And then at the end of the year, we take the winners. And this year was a little different. Normally we pick one male and one female, but with the way things kind of fell apart this year, we decided that we wanted to give out more.
Okay.
So we give it out. And it's something that the athletic trainers have taken a lot of pride in, and the sports medicine team with our physical therapists and things to get these athletes some recognition. Maybe they're not getting the the accolades on the field, but you know what work they're doing behind the scenes. And the ones that are not only on the sports teams, but they're president of their class, they're in the FFA, they're doing things like that as well. So we really push to get those good kids out. And we get a lot of nominations. We'd like to see a lot more nominations coming in, but we've had some really good students that have been successful.
That's awesome. And there are a lot of qualified candidates out there, I'm sure. But I'm pleased to announce several of our student athletes. So congratulations to Adena Sports Medicine and Adena Health Foundation. The winners for this year's scholarships are Noah Donnelly from Oak Hill High School, Riley Fee from Vinton County High School, Nate Kaiser from Munoyoto High School, Abigail Meldick from Oak Hill High School, and Hannah Stark from Adena High School. So congratulations to these 5 student athletes for being Adena's 2020 Athlete of the Year Scholarship winners. Congratulations to them. Well, thank you so much, Carrie and Shane, for taking time out of your busy schedules today. In the couple of minutes that we have left, I'd love for you to just give some parting thoughts. So I'll start with you, Carrie. Any last things that you would want the audience, the viewers to know about their children and school getting ready, particularly in this different kind of school year?
I would say the most important thing is to make sure that your child is mentally healthy at this time and make sure you're engaging with your child, not just assuming that because they're on their phone and acting like everything's fine, that they are. Make sure that they're maintaining social interactions with their friends. Make sure that they're being active. We've seen a lot of weight gain in kids lately because they have isolated themselves more than they necessarily have needed to. Make sure that they are getting engaged in sports. If they haven't been in a sport before, have them try one. If they don't like it, that's okay. But it's important to try something new.
And Shane?
I think, like, carry on what Carrie has said there, being engaged and being involved. And if you've got questions about your athlete's health care, don't be afraid to reach out, especially to your athletic trainer. We're there day in, day out. We see these kids, and don't be afraid to reach out and ask us questions.
And we'll end with that. Don't be afraid and reach out. Thank you very much to Carrie Johnson, a nurse practitioner from Adena Family Medicine in Waverly, and grateful also to Shane Wells, who's athletic trainer from Adena Sports Medicine Program. Join us again in 2 weeks for another episode of Living Well with Adena, and we look forward to having you again. Have a fantastic day, end of a great summer, and a good beginning of another great school year. Thank you very much.